Thank you, Alina. And thank you, SIPA, for both having this conference and having me here for this interesting conversation. As you just heard, this is obviously an enormously consequential moment in sort of the history of defense, the history of the transatlantic relationship, and obviously also the history of technological development, which is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about what autonomous systems mean for the future of warfare, how both the United States and Europe can be investing in them, and how these partnerships might evolve in coming years. And I think it's a really interesting moment to have this conversation, and especially to have this conversation in Brussels as Europe really ramps up its procurement push, as we talk a lot about the future investments in these technologies, and talk a lot about interoperability and how they might work together. I am Jeanna Smialek, as Alina mentioned. I'm the Brussels bureau chief at the New York Times. I'm going to be your moderator, and I will invite the panel up. We have a great panel for you today. We've got General Daniel Petrescu, who was formerly the Chief of Defense for Romania's Armed Forces from 2019 to 2023, and is now a member of the International Leadership Council here at SIPA. We've got Robert Geckle. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes. You got it.
Who is the Chairman and CEO of Airbus US Defense and Space. So quiet time for you. And we've got Lieutenant General Piotr Błazeusz.
Pretty good.
I'm working on it. Who is the commanding general for Eurocorps. So a great group of people to have this conversation today. Just to get it started, and I'm going to ask all of you this question, but we'll get started here. Obviously, the Allied forces face a number of key challenges today when it comes to adapting and integrating autonomous systems, both in operational planning, but also in capability development. Where are we today when it comes to sort of tackling those challenges, both as an alliance, but also from a national perspective?
Yeah, thank you, Gina. I will answer your question, but let me start thanking SIPA for inviting me here. I'm truly honored to be part of this organization. I truly appreciate the way you focus on tech and security, and I'm happy to attend this conference. And I want to underline what you said, Alina, at the beginning. Europe truly needs the United States, and the United States truly needs Europe. So this is something we need to keep in mind throughout the conference. I was told I have 5 minutes for some opening remarks, please. But I will start with your question, and I will put my former commander face. And the commander is never happy with the resources he gets and with the capabilities he has. So I would say we make a lot of steps, but we are going into the right direction, but we are not going at the necessary speed, which is requested right now from our forces and for our capabilities. I think it's good that we focus on technology, and technology drives the way the warfare evolves. But I would start also saying that war is also a human endeavor. And we should not forget what Clausewitz used to say some centuries ago, that in order to be successful in war, the triad, government, people, and armed forces needs to work perfectly. So when we think about how technology works, this is only part of the issue. The other part is how you make this triad, government, people, and armed forces to work together. And because during this conference we focus on lessons learned from Ukraine and what is important for NATO, I would say that there are some important strategic lessons we can take into account before the war starts, during the war, and before and during the war, which are important for us. What we have learned, so before the war starts, weakness encourages aggression. And no country can defend or deter alone. When the war starts, aggressor obviously has more capacity. He has the advantage of hardware. Normal he has, because otherwise he would not have attacked. You need to counter him with limited resources, and you cannot do it alone. Raw warfare, firepower remains very important. Drones cannot replace people because you need people in order to conquer a certain and dominate a certain territory. But we can very well have what I've read in some articles, our Oppenheimer moment in terms of drones and artificial intelligence, because really the way this evolve could drive the future of warfare. What's in it for NATO and EU? Important thing is that technology drives the evolution of the warfare. We need to build our organization, and I'm not sure that we are really fit for purpose here, to be able to decentralize more, to be able to fail, learn, and recover, and to have a reliable defense industry that we can count on, because you cannot have all the drones in stock before the war starts. You need to be able to adapt, to use the civilian drones, to use artificial intelligence, and so on. And what is important, a very reliable supply chain. And here I think there are challenges we need to overcome. So where we are making a lot of steps, we are moving, but we need to speed up the way we move, in my opinion.
Okay, interesting. And as a member of the supply chain.
That's right. The supply chain gets beat up a lot. So, well, first of all, I think you'll hear some similar comments from my perspective. First of all, thank you also for including Airbus in this panel. I often say that as a heritage European company, but doing business in the United States, in defense, in space, in helicopters, we are a bit of the embodiment of the transatlantic alliance, and the ligature that allows us to be successful is that trust that underpins the alliance. In terms of autonomy and the national perspective and the alliance perspective of where we are, I'd say it's a mixed bag. In terms of the positive, when you look at the evolution from the Biden administration into the Trump administration, the positive is that there is a recognition of the importance of autonomy, both from the small tactical standpoint and Project Replicator, all the way up to more exquisite solutions like collaborative combat aircraft, where you have manned-on-manned teaming, and even in domains like space, with space situational awareness and autonomy. And I see that also in Europe, a recognition that autonomy is going to be a key enabler. I also see as a positive the funding. In the U.S., there is a clear funding support for unmanned systems and autonomy. In fact, you will see that a lot of the retransitioning of funding that's taking place in the U.S. in the Pentagon's budget is going from manned platforms to unmanned, particularly with the Army as a bill player. We still have manned-funded programs like the 6th generation F-47 and other elements. But I see funding. Other positive is I see a lot of non-traditional disruptive players in this ecosystem, both in Europe. You mentioned Mistral. You could add Helsing to that discussion. In the U.S., you have Oterion, and I think we have the benefit of Oterion doing a fireside. But Shield AI, Anduril, a lot of really interesting, innovative companies that are self-investing in autonomy, and I'm teaming with those companies. In fact, Shield AI and Airbus US are investing in taking our manned helicopter and turning it into an unmanned platform so we can do distributed logistics for the Marine Corps in contested environments. And so that ecosystem of non-traditionals, innovation, all really good. Now to the other part of the mixed bag, I think I would agree with you from a national perspective, still not fast enough in terms of operationalizing capabilities. And certainly what Ukraine has been able to do on a cost-effective basis and with a sense of urgency of iteratively fielding autonomous solutions, I think that is the model. And when you look at it from an alliance perspective, I still think there's more that we could be doing in terms of co-production, co-design. What you described from the Google discussion this morning in terms of co-development, I see that in the commercial dual use space and commercial aviation. In the defense space, you're talking about classified systems subject to export control, different varying cybersecurity requirements. I think we need to lay flat some of the regulatory blob to allow that type of innovation, transatlantic innovation, to take place. And I think there's more that can be done in that regard. So.
Lieutenant General?
All right, ready for a long lecture? Because this is the most the mistake you always make. If you give a microphone to the general, he's gonna speak for a long time. But anyway, what you're gonna hear from me is obviously are my personal opinions that are not necessarily official position of my Ministry of Defense, because I am, I'm a former vice chot in the Polish General Staff, but now currently serving as the commander of the Eurocorps. So first of all, I think there's no doubt that this unmanned autonomous systems, let's call them, it's a disruptive technology innovation. And this is something that we can probably compare to things like what Admiral Jackie Fisher was doing with introduction of the dreadnoughts, something that was happening when Air Force came online, when naval aviation came online, and also when aircraft carriers came online. All the resistance that those people were facing when they're trying to innovate and change, we're seeing some of it now a little bit with the drones, I think. But what's important is introduction of the systems changed the battlefield geometry, but didn't bring any decisive solution for the moment, okay? And it happened many times in the history when you look at any kinds of, let's call it the old name, Wunderwaffe, okay? They change some of the tactical issues. We were able to win some battles, but at the end, it didn't change the course of the war. Now, something to remember, there is no such thing as a NATO or EU army, okay? It's a misperception. In reality, it's a 32 armies, well, maybe exception. There's one country that doesn't have the army really, 27 member states on the EU side. And those are the ones that that are deciding about the future. EU and NATO are just pointing in the direction. It's giving the target goals and so on. But in reality, as mentioned here and then before, this is all about the governments that have to make this decision and the militaries that have to implement it. On the NATO side, there is quite a lot written in the operational standardization about the air manned systems. There is very little on the sea. We're having some problems, I think. Sorry, no problem. Thank you. So there is very little on the side of the sea unmanned systems, on the ground ones, and almost nothing on the space ones, which is already happening, but this is something that we don't consider. But in reality, to me, all sorts of satellites are unmanned systems. Chinese, as you know, grabbed one of the satellites, the old ones, and they were able to move it to a completely different orbit. And by the way, it was not discovered by the military systems, but it was a private company that informed the military, hey, did you notice that Chinese have showed this capability? Now, I'm a strong believer that before deciding on the structures, organizational structures for introduction of such systems to any organization, first, we should quickly revise our doctrine and the operational concept. The operational concept in the military means how we want to fight. And only then we can really decide on the structures level and so on. I strongly believe, just like in Ukraine, like the US and a number of countries, the unmanned systems should go down to the company level. That's why the solution, the way I look at the employment, I should say, of those systems is on one hand, they should be simple ones and they should be integral part of the units, but also certain more complex systems should be a separate units, like Ukrainians have those FPV brigades, right? And then those higher level capabilities are just assigned to particular units to enhance their capabilities. In NATO, there is a NATO Task Force X run by ACT. This is a great development. This is more focused on the sea unmanned systems, but this is a good start. There is a discussion, there's showing the capabilities, what it can do, and with respect especially also to protection of the underwater infrastructure. There is a drone coalition on the NATO side, as you know, that countries are providing a lot of those unmanned systems to the Ukraine. Now, but in reality, to introduction of those systems, it's all about our adaptability, our ability to innovate, and also cutting the red tape. because all of our countries are facing. I'm trying to purchase some even miniature unmanned systems for the Eurocorps right now. And trust me, I'm being told, sir, but you cannot use it here. You need the special licenses for the people to operate them. It takes time, money, and you cannot use it here because it's too close to the airfield, and so on and so on. And I'm telling my team, doesn't matter what system we buy, the idea is that we have the process done, that we have the procedures that if we have such systems, then we're able to easily incorporate them into my headquarters, usually the so-called Joint Operations Center or a Tactical Operations Center. So I strongly believe unmanned autonomous systems should in the future become the part of the military soldiers' DNA, and sailors obviously and airmen. It should be something similar in the future, like the use of the gas masks by the soldier or automatic weapons. The mentality should be there, but also ability to quickly use. And I'm talking about really complex systems, right? But simple ones, cheap ones that are changing this battlefield geometry. And just to finish up, what are the main, I would say, obstacles in making this change faster? Comfort zone, okay? In the military, a lot of us are in the comfort zone. We're used to doing things a certain way. We have certain experience from this counterinsurgency operations. Some of my friends are not willing to get out of this comfort zone, okay? And it's difficult. The other point is obviously it's changing the mindset and the culture. The whole discussion about manned versus unmanned, pairing, or maybe eventually unmanned taking over the manned, very complex discussion with my friends pilots, also with the sailors, telling them you don't need big ships anymore, that many. You need some, but focus more on those unmanned autonomous systems. The doctrinal, as I mentioned, and operational concept change. This is something that usually takes time. I think Ukraine took 3 years, from what I heard, to develop their own doctrine on how to use those systems. And again, right now we're seeing rather great use of the air unmanned systems, the recent attack in mermaids, very little on the ground, and obviously quite a lot on the Black Sea, which was quite successful. I've seen something to tease the Navy admirals, hey, so look at what's happening in the Black Sea, and they don't even have the Navy, right? And last point, it's also all about experimentation, simulation, proving and showing to high-ranking commanders the value added of this innovative technology, of this disruptive technology innovation. Because when they see the value added, when they see that they can lose a certain simulation because the enemy is using those systems, this is the best way to kind of make them think. Thank you.
I'm actually going to stick with you, so hold on to your microphone for the moment. To your point that it's not one NATO army, it's not one EU army, it's rather 32 militaries. I wonder, we've obviously seen both Ukraine and Russia really investing in and creating new branches in their military specifically for these unmanned systems. Is that something that these 32 militaries should be thinking about? Is that something that the rest of Europe should be considering?
You mean the structures?
Yeah.
As I said, they are important and we need them. And actually, they're slowly being introduced in different militaries. They, as usually in NATO, they will probably differ. Will not have the same structure for a number of reasons in different armed forces. In Poland, for example, we just created, it was stood up on the 1st January of this year, I would say, unmanned systems component command. So we are trying to get, everything together. It's a little bit like in the US that Replicator 2, that you have two, I think, what I understand, two major procurement branches of the armed forces, that Army and the Air Force are buying slightly different systems. But the idea is to get it together, work on this doctrine, okay, introduce it even more into our operational concept. So it's happening in a number of countries. The recent UK white paper also stresses the importance of those unmanned systems. And we've seen the success of those systems. But the issue is, just like with the Replicator program in the US, one is about having those systems, the other one having systems that will defend us from the systems. And the third one, angle I would add, taking over the enemy systems. Ability that, if enemy is using certain systems, are we able to take over those systems and turn them against them? Thank you.
Oh, interesting. I want to come back to Replicator, but before I do, I wonder, General Petrescu, if you could tell us a little bit about how this all looks from where you sit.
Yeah, in terms of what you asked, having the different headquarters and the different force category and so on, I'm a little bit more old school regarding this. And I wonder why the Russians and the Ukrainians did that. And my personal opinion is that you need to integrate at the very low level, and they have units involved in the fight, so they needed somebody from the back to take care of the doctrine, to take care of the production, to take care of all the issues. .ml PFI, the way we say in the armed forces, in order to have the system work. So there are advantages, but there are disadvantages. In my opinion, yes, we need to integrate in the Navy, we need to integrate in the Air Force, we need to integrate in the Army, and we need a headquarters to be able to push for more innovation, for building more drones and so on. So I wouldn't create a special combatant commander only for the drones. But we'll see how things evolve, and we need to adapt.
Yeah, interesting. And on one of the points that the Lieutenant General was making, I wonder if we could get your perspective on it. Obviously we have seen the success on the Black Sea for Ukraine, and I wonder how that informs how we integrate this it sort of on the sea in a Navy sense.
Yeah, definitely using unmanned system on the Black Sea. This is at the core of the Ukrainian success was in pushing the Russian Black Sea fleet, from Crimea farther west. But we should not focus only on drones, because there was a system of systems there. You need good intel regarding what is going on. You need good surveillance on the whole of the Black Sea. You need cooperation. You need cyber warfare. You need space, and so on. It's very interesting to me, and one of the lessons learned from using drones and artificial intelligence in Ukraine, it's how much the civilians get involved into supporting the armed forces in fighting the enemy, how this expands, and how much when the adversary is that powerful, you need to counter him not only with hardware, you need to counter with your intelligence and creativity and so on. At the core of the Ukrainian creativity is this pushing towards more unmanned system. And this has a psychological effect not only on the military, but also on the civilian society, because it brings success. And using more is like reinforcing success. So what we see in the Black Sea, it's a system, more things, but I agree, the unmanned system are at the core of that success.
That's a really interesting point, because is that something that can be replicated? Can you systematize that kind of all hands on deck?
I think if you want to have success, you definitely need to replicate that. Yeah. And yesterday evening during the reception, we had an interesting conversation, and it was an interesting idea. So think at the Ukrainian successes with spider web, spider net, whatever, and think if that attack would be on our ports, General Breedlove underlined last evening, how we would defend and how successful would be in defending against such an operation. Because what is happening right now could happen anytime in a future conflict. We, the military, have the tendency to prepare for the last conflict we've seen. We need to think about the future, but we need not to forget what is going on right now and how we prepare for this.
Yeah, interesting. Mr. Geckle, I'd like to come to you. From an industry perspective, I wonder if you can talk, we've heard a lot from the national or global perspective about what sort of the big challenges are, but from your perspective, what are the big challenges to getting autonomous systems out there, to making them an integrated part of the military system?
Yeah, it's a good question. Just coming back to the question of where do you place responsibility for drone warfare? Is it the unit? Is it a special drone squad? This has impact on the industry side, interestingly enough, because in the U.S. there's clearly a push on the tactical drone side to have this at the unit level, right? And so when we are developing tactical drone capabilities now, put aside the exquisite solutions, we'll spend as much time with our engineers on how do these systems work in a GPS comms denied environment. One side. The other side is, what is the user interface of this equipment. It has to be user-friendly so that private first class can take this and within a day of training is actually able to deploy this. And that's a little bit different from what aerospace industry has been doing on exquisite solutions, right? Where you're assuming you have a specialist or a software engineer operating some of these capabilities. And so where you put it in the command structure is actually having cascading impacts on how we develop the technology and solutions. So your question was, the challenges of, okay, from an industry standpoint, I would say the technology, and I find this is more and more frequently the case, the technology is usually not the problem. It is the policy incentives and the demand signals that you need to step to, right? So there's any number of capabilities that we could scale today. The question is there a reliable demand signal or a funding horizon for that, either with a long-term program or at least the concept that the government's going to engage in a spiral development ecosystem so you can invest on the one hand, and on the other hand, the legitimate policy concern about vendor lock, right? And in an area where there is such rapid iterative innovation, I think that's where policy and industry struggle a little bit, right? We want affordable mass, we want scalability, but we also want to be able to rapidly onboard innovations. And I think that, at least a potential avenue is on the hardware side to try and have design freezes and long-term procurement, also have modular open systems architecture. So this is what we're doing on our military helicopters, right? We're taking a commercial off-the-shelf helicopter, but we're working with L3, Imperial Labs, and other companies to onboard a digital backbone that, you can buy the hardware. You can buy 500 of these helicopters. The Marine Corps can buy them, the Army can buy them, and you will have a MOSA system so that as there are new innovations on the C2 side, command and control, sensors, that you can implement those without being worried about vendor lock. But I think that is one of the challenges that we face. I want scale, I want capacity, I don't want to have another 155 scenario where I can't get enough rounds because I didn't have an inventory, but I also don't want a 10-year contract for stuff that's going to be outdated in 6 months. So those are some of the challenges. I've sort of teased out maybe a solution that could work in some contexts.
Yeah, interesting. I want to get back to the replicator program, and I'll stick with you for a second if you don't mind, because obviously we've seen this in the U.S. A, I wonder, do you think it's been successful? And B, do you see any opportunities on the horizon for Europe to do something similar?
Yeah, I think it's always safe to channel other industry voices rather than saying it yourself. I would say when Replicator was announced by Kat Hicks, the reaction, and I'm synthesizing, was this is a great idea. Where's the money? Because there wasn't really a separate funding associated with the program. And the sense was, hey, you've got all of these, there's a Navy program, there's an Air Force program, there's an Army program looking at tactical drones, autonomous solutions, both airborne, sea, subsea, but where's the additional funding? Are we just cannibalizing those existing projects and trying to bring them forward? I think as things have evolved, there's positive support from a funding perspective on autonomy. And so I think it will be successful. In terms of Europe, the whole idea of Replicator is creating a hellscape of unmanned systems, right, in various denied environments, probably Asia Pacific. So think about a seaborne drone, subsea, airborne, and it has to be mass and it has to be affordable, right? And that's the concept. And I think that Ukraine has demonstrated the value proposition, not just for Asia Pacific, but also for the European theater. What I do think, when you're talking about affordable mass, I do think that there should be a value proposition of working transatlantically on either the production capacity on the hardware side. So yes, I see a value proposition for Europe. And I also see a value proposition for working through the alliance. I mean, we're trying to do this with AUKUS, right? Pillar 2 of AUKUS, which is UK, Australia, United States, started with nuclear subs, Virginia-class subs, but now they're moving to hypersonics and AI and autonomy. I think that type of co-design, co-creation, co-production in AI and autonomy it's a useful concept to pursue transatlantically as well within key either Five Eyes or other key NATO allies. So I'll pause there.
Yeah, interesting. Please go ahead and react.
All right. As mentioned, the idea for a replicator is to have so-called attritable capability. So cheap and something that the commander is more willing to put at risk because it's easy to replace, not like MQ-9s that the US has lost to Houthis, right? Quite a few, very expensive, and it takes time to manufacture them. I think what I see the success of this program, because it's happening. The goal, target goal for the replicator 1 and 2 is more or less 18 to 24 months to achieve as much as possible, and it seems that it's really progressing. The success story, I think, is this cooperation between the DoD as the user, let's say, between the manufacturers as the ones that are manufacturing and the US Congress, which is responsible for all sorts of policies, but also especially for the funding. And funding is there now, I believe, of 50, 100 million or whatever the amount is, I don't remember. So this is something that it's worth looking at, that in Europe, if we want to make it happen, how to get this trio together to talk to each other and quickly adjust to whatever is really required. Now, a little bit for going back to the previous discussion. I think, and I'm not endorsing this product, but it's a good example of the Maven. Maven is a success in the Department of Defense, but it's also now being purchased by the NATO. It's a great integrator, open architecture, system that allows you to almost plug in any type of source of information you need. With AI, be able to, scrutinize it, filter it, and deliver to what you are interested to. So this is already happening. It's all obviously the challenges with building the right databases and having access to the right databases. The other example, and again, I'm not endorsing of a great product, is the data miner. Something that no intelligence agency can beat the timing on the alerting and warning, not on telling you what it means that something happened in the world, but just giving you the alert, hey, look. And I can tell you that a lot of important people have direct access and they get those alerts, immediately that something is boiling in a certain part of the world that are of interest to them. So to sum up, the technology is there, and Replicator, from my perspective, is a good example of how you can structure this kind of initiative. And I think in Europe, we also should probably do something similar. There are a number of programs, right, under both organizations, but I think having it more even structured would probably bring even greater access. And the last point, I'm a big fan of the additive manufacturing, the 3D printing. This is going to change the battlefield dramatically. And I know that, for example, the US Multi-Domain Task Force is already experimenting with manufacturing those drones, in the garage, as we say, right? There are some challenges, but it's happening. The logistics, huge change for us. If we'll be able to manufacture the spare parts on the spot, more or less, huge change for the whole supply chain. Thank you.
If I could add some ideas here, I think there is definitely a moment in Europe to invest more in defense. When I look at the initiatives, there are a lot of initiatives from Security Action from Europe, Readiness 2020, European Chips Act, Cyber Resilience Act, PESCO, and so on. But I'm not sure how much we are prepared to move forward and adapt the procedures, because we try to invest more in drones and work collaboratively, but using the same procedures in each country. And I think buying drones is not the same like buying 155. And our procedures somehow are adapted to buy 155 right now. 155 I can buy, put in storage, and use it when I need in 10 years and so on. Drones, if you are in war, yes, there is definitely an advantage. You buy and you use it. But if you are not at war, you cannot afford to buy that many and keep them in storage because they will be obsolete in 1 year, in 2 years, and so on. So how can we find that balance in order to adapt our procurement procedures? That is a question, and I'm not sure we are doing enough here.
That's interesting. I wonder if you have hope for, obviously I sit here in Brussels all the time, and we talk endlessly about this $150 billion loan program that the EU is rolling out called SAFE. Do you have a lot of hope for that? Like, do you think that that could offer the kind of flexibility for purchases that you're talking about, or?
Very honestly speaking, I think we have as many chances to succeed as we have to fail.
Optimistic. Okay, I'm just going to ask one more before we go to the room for questions. So get your questions ready. But all of you have touched on or talked directly about this idea that sort of transatlantic cooperation is a really important part of this development of autonomous systems and these technologies and the integration of these technologies. And obviously, you know, as we talked about on the first panel, the elephant in the room is sort of the tension around that transatlantic relationship. And so I wonder if each of you, and we'll just go down the line, but I wonder if each of you could take a turn, just sort of an overview of where you see that relationship sitting right now, and then how do you think that's going to sort of impact the future of procurement and technology integration into military systems?
In our national security strategy, we say we based our security on 3 pillars, and this is NATO, EU, and the special relationship with the US. So I think the special relationship with the US is essential, not only for the EU, but for every European country. And I hope we will find the wisdom in order to keep that, you know, going and to take advantage. I mean, use that for our own security, because we said at the beginning, US needs Europe, Europe needs the US. So I'm optimistic that will be wise, and I don't think we have to choose like a European country right now between US or EU. We need to push both to work together. I hope that will happen. This is my hope.
Yeah, I think that's well said. You know, when you look at our near peer adversaries, competitors, you could say from a manufacturing industrial standpoint, they're on a war footing. And the discriminating asymmetric advantages that I think that we have as allies are one, commercial innovation, particularly software and AI, potentially space superiority. And then the third is our series of alliances with fellow democracies. And all 3 of those, I think, need to be put on steroids. I tend to take a longer term, more optimistic view of the alliance. You know, I was working in Paris during the Freedom Fries era, and I remember studying the Suez crisis, between allies, where, we're not any Suez type crisis where some people are talking, France is withdrawing from the NATO command structure, which they did, and then they ultimately rejoined. I think these marriages, I still think is like a marriage, right? And marriages are going to have those sort of rocky points, but I'm overall optimistic because I don't see an alternative logically. No.
I concur with this comparison of the marriage. Sometimes there are quiet days, things happen, but at the end, in most cases, we get back. I would say that this is not the first time that we are on a rocky road, bumpy road between the countries on both sides of the Atlantic. We are always able to overcome it. Even during the Cold War, there were some serious crises within the NATO caused by what US was expecting. US was telling Europe many times, you need to spend more on defense. We cannot always, provide for you for defense. You should be part of it too. So this is nothing new, I would say. This was, as I mentioned, there is this book by Robert Kagan of Power and something, I don't remember the title, from 2000, Paradise and Power. If you read it and you quote it today, it's still valid. I mean, this is surprising, but so I don't worry about these relations. It's all about always communications. As we discussed yesterday, it's all about explaining each side the narrative and being very open about certain issues. and going forward, because I think there are interests on both sides. Because, okay, hypothetically, if Europe is able to start manufacturing certain products that are not now available in Europe, then the US business will lose, right? Because Europe will not be buying US origin products anymore. So I think we need a balance. F-35 is the best example. Is there really a need for Europe to try to develop a similar, extremely expensive, very capable platform? Or maybe we should focus on something else? A lot of discussions are really associated with this one. But I would say in Poland, with regard to this issue, we always say that it's always good, instead of having one insurance security policy, having two, being both Europe and the US, and working together. It's also all about the secure supply chain and ability to move, forces, troops across the Atlantic. It's all about the dual-use technology. It's all about accessibility to this technology. Nowadays, it's not like in the old times that there was only one company that had certain technology. A lot of those technologies, especially, for example, AI, it's changing so fast and it's so available, to anybody that it's amazing. So it's difficult for the companies probably. But that's what's happening, right? Ukrainians are using certain products that are available, to anybody online. I always have this crazy idea that maybe in the future it will be more possible. Again, going back to General Breedlove yesterday and his discussion about the proprietary rights, maybe we can develop certain products, i.e. with EU funds. Then the EU is also the owner of this technology and can award or for a little money give those licenses to certain companies. Okay, why don't you manufacture it? Here's all the documents you need to start doing it, and then we'll provide a little funding. Because it's difficult, I understand, for the business side, because you're breaking certain, accessibility to funding and so on. But I think it's the future. With the development of the technology, AI is everywhere. And ChatGPT versus the Chinese version, right? It just showed up all of a sudden, right? And it's available to anybody. So I think that's the future. Industries, I think, will adjust. And the transatlantic relationship, I think, always survived all types of, thunderstorms or even tornadoes. And I think this is going to be the case this time too. Thank you.
It's either a marital dispute or a natural disaster, what you're telling us. Okay, we're going to take a couple of questions before we go to break. I think there's a microphone going around. Should we start back here? Yeah.
Bogdan, I'm from Ukraine, student currently at the University of Dundee, Scotland. Thank you for this presentation, for this talk. It was very insightful, and that's my first time in SIPA. That's amazing. Thank you. That's fun what you're doing here. Yeah, and my question was initially about not technology, but doctrines, tactics. But thank you, all of you. You answered that, because I think that not technology changing battlefield, but how you implement this technology. Speed of decision making, how you implement them, that's a key, in my opinion. And the question, So in Europe, it is a top-down innovation cycle. But what we see in Ukraine, it is bottom-up. So in all these innovations like drones and electronic warfare, that's because of bottom-up innovation cycle. What do you think about Europe? Does it possible in peaceful Europe right now to make these bottom-up innovations, taking, of course, Ukrainian experience, or Ukraine, that's a unique case? Thank you.
Do you want to start?
Yeah. When you say Europe, I guess you mean the European Union. Okay. Yes, probably there is a top-down tendency to regulate, but I don't think this top-down stops the bottom-up. And it's not only that, we should not look only into what the Brussels is doing, what the Brussels is asking us to do. Each country has its own responsibility to develop the capabilities within the armed forces, and the countries can use what is good coming from Brussels, and they also can encourage the bottom-up innovation in their own countries. So I don't see a conflict about top-down and bottom-up. What I see in Brussels, though, and is true, for example, if you look at the European Union programs for innovation, there is more like a push towards the civilian innovation, like, for example, dual-use technologies, in my opinion. It's more like we need civilian first, and then let's see if we can use them for military use. So probably this is some area where we can improve these dual-use technologies and force more to innovate for the military also. But otherwise, I don't see that conflict happening, and I love the EU.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have. I think that your reaction of the innovation taking place in the commercial space resonates with me, particularly in AI and software, and I see the pace there as frenetic, and I would say in the U.S. particularly, in Silicon Valley and elsewhere. And how do you innovate in the absence of a crisis? In large governmental bureaucracies, there's so much ink spilled on that. I remember during the Gulf War, we were able to very quickly implement MRAPs, up armored vehicles, because we had bodies, right? And you can do it in a crisis, and Ukraine is in a crisis, and so they're rapidly innovating. How do you have that rapid innovation in a large defense procurement environment is something that we've been trying to do for years, and there are pockets where it works, like DARPA, DIU, DIUX in Austin, and I think there's these incubators. But to do it at scale is if you could figure that out in peacetime, to have that sense of urgency of innovation in large procurement organizations, then you will have solved the last 50 years. And that's why I think in terms of looking for innovation, we've got to use more commercial dual-use technology, and that would sort of be my talking point to the government. The innovation is taking place. There is that sense of urgency because these startups are going to go out of business, right? And it's life or death. And so they're rapidly innovating. It's always been the policy of the U.S. government to use commercial off the shelf, but I'd say it's been used by exception rather than by the norm. I think we need to flip it. Again, I can't speak. So I know your question was on Europe. I started speaking more broadly.
Again, I was already mentioned, the main difference is that Ukraine is at war. And it's all about the survivability of your country. So you were able to really cut the bureaucracy. And as you said, a lot is coming bottom up. At the beginning, the companies didn't even have to register. They were just manufacturing, all sorts of drones and so on. In Europe, we're in peacetime. I mean, we're not even officially in crisis. So that's why it's much more complex for us. The other point I want to make is I'm a strong believer that the whatever architecture for any unmanned systems we build has to be an open one. So on one hand, it should be built by the consolidated, strong European companies, but at the same time, there should be ability for small companies, startups, if they have an application, if they have a program that is very, very good, that we're able to plug it in. And in the US, you mentioned DIU, they did a phenomenal job of making it easier for small companies and startups to get access to the normal procurement system, which before was impossible. You mentioned Rumsfeld. Rumsfeld was the one that was really upset with the procurement procedure in the Pentagon. MRAP, one example. But he cut it down to, I think, to 9 months or so, the turnaround. The challenge for us is also, for example, we have certain jamming systems, and you know that Polish airspace is often violated by the Russian drones. The problem is you cannot really use those systems in peacetime. So you have to be careful, because if you turn them on, you cut out almost anything in this area. Also, doing big exercises using electronic warfare in Europe is very difficult, and you know why. So, last point about the jamming, I think what Ukrainians did a phenomenal job is they keep changing the frequencies, and they're also using fiber cables for the drones, and Russians are jetting. But what it costs to the Russian jamming systems they had to, invest even more money to now cover much wider spectrum of the frequencies that they have to cover. So you are doing, as Ukraine, a phenomenal job. You are really making it very costly for the Russians. And I think we all will continue supporting you as much as we can, because in Poland we know that if Ukraine, for whatever reason, there is a negative outcome, there are other countries that could be the next ones to be picked on. Thank you.
I think we have time for probably one more rapid question. No. We're thinking. One really quick question, and then we will wrap. I think we have one up here.
Thank you. Ramona Sananis, Cabinet of Commissioner Kubilius. Very short question. Exactly at the very beginning of this event, you spoke about the partnerships between EU and US, and then we moved to the military domain. So do you see those partnerships evolving also in military domain with Ukrainian companies that would be ready also to be established on the EU soil? And if you see them, what challenges you meet exactly at those practical details?
Industry?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question for Lorenz, who's going to be doing his fireside, and he'll tell you, I think, some interesting things that they're doing. Look, I believe it's inevitable that there will be collaboration, teaming, joint venturing, co-investment, industrialization at some point with the Ukrainian industry that has proven itself in the context of this conflict. In terms of the status of that and pacing, I don't have individual personal insight, but I would be surprised if it were otherwise, that global defense industries, everything from small companies to large traditional primes, it would be foolish to not look at those capabilities that have been developed and see if they can help scale them or co-produce. I just think that would be logical. Right now it's in the middle of the fight, and so perhaps it's not sufficiently mature. But I would be surprised if it were otherwise long term.
Just a small add-on. I think everybody is collecting as many lessons learned, lessons identified, and try to turn them into lessons learned from what Ukraine is doing. And they are extremely innovative. The Neptune missile is another example, right? So they, I think, advanced in a number of areas where maybe we are now doing more R&D or thinking about it. So absolutely, it's a warfare, and I think it's quietly happening. I will not speak on the behalf of the German companies, but I know they are the ones that are having some success in this cooperation. There is a discussion about setting up the factory in Ukraine and so on. The challenge obviously is the risk acceptance by the companies, right? Because it becomes a legitimate target for the Russians, and then you kind of have to accept it that potentially this factory could be destroyed. But I absolutely believe that this is one of Ukraine right now is the best battlefield lab. Whatever you develop in the defense industry, tech, this is the best area to test. And in a way, the cheapest one. You don't need to create, artificial environment to test it. And I think that's what's happening too, that certain systems, certain solutions, certain applications are being used and tested. And we should continue it. But again, as mentioned by my friend here, I cannot imagine that we will not take advantage of the Ukrainian experience in how they were able to first cut the bureaucracy. Again, different circumstances, as I mentioned. How they were able to encourage this innovation, and how generally they've been able to a large extent, change from the Soviet-style thinking to a very modern one that exceeds even in some areas us. Although, very honestly, there are some areas that, some commanders that are also thinking a little bit the old way. But in general, I must say, this is a good example of if we want to prepare for the threat that both NATO and EU recognize, meaning Russia, we need to really look closely and take what we think will be useful for us. Thank you.
Very, very quickly, did you have any thoughts?
I'm not an expert into this field, but I think what you mean, so I don't see why not to happen the partnership. I think the issue is how you get this partnership with the Ukrainian companies to get access to the EU funding and the EU programs and so on, like third-party participation into the EU programs. And I know there have been discussions when the US had to be involved in EU programs. So I'm not an expert into that, but this is something we need to consider.
All right.
Very quick one. Two other issues that I think a lot of countries and industries are concerned also in this cooperation. One is the infamous proprietary rights and transfer of technology. And the other one is something that Ukraine is really improving, is the issue, obviously, of corruption. I mean, they went a long road, and they are keep improving. But this is still, for some organizations, a factor. Thank you.
And I think with that, we need to leave it. There is going to be a break for refreshments now, and the program will restart after that. So thank you all.
Thank you.